Before dawn, Savannah was still blue and breathless, and my little kitchen hummed like a secret, kettle whispering, suitcase by the door, passport tucked where I could reach it without thinking. I'd bought a wide brim hat for the deck, imagined Ruby asleep on my shoulder while the Atlantic unrolled like ribbon. It was the first trip we'd planned together in years. I was humming when the phone lit up. "You won't be coming with us, Mom. Adam's mother prefers it to be just family. Marissa." I read it once, again, a third time, as if repetition could turn exile into etiquette. Steam blurred my glasses. The letters stayed sharp. Just family. Strange how two words can scrape a lifetime clean. I set the cup down so gently you'd think it might bruise. My overnight bag looked back at me like a loyal dog I couldn't take for a walk. Outside, gulls stitched the sky. Inside, my chest cinched tight. The room suddenly airless. It wasn't the cruise that broke me. It was the definition. On my desk, the leather folder I hadn't touched in months waited, heavy with signatures and dates. Another language for love that isn't easily erased. I didn't open it yet. I stood in the doorway between kitchen and hall, listening to a house that had always forgiven me for staying. They were already sailing without me. They just didn't know whose tide they'd set in motion. My name is Eleanor Hayes, 70 years old, retired school principal, and the only one in my family who still remembers what gratitude sounds like. I live alone now, in a small house with creaking floors and a window that faces the marsh. It's quiet here, so quiet that the kettle's whistle feels like conversation. I used to think that silence meant loneliness. Now I know it can also mean peace. I wasn't always this way. I used to open my doors at the first knock, say yes before anyone finished asking. I believed love was measured in how much of yourself you could give away. But when you spend years giving without return, even kindness begins to ache. Before you judge me, hear my story. Then tell me if I was wrong to finally close the door. Would you have done the same? Comment below and don't forget to subscribe if you've ever learned that love sometimes hurts most when it's one-sided. People say age makes you softer. Maybe it does, but it also sharpens what matters. And what mattered that morning wasn't revenge, it was remembrance of every time I said yes when I should have said no. That's where my story begins. It's strange how betrayal doesn't always begin with cruelty. Sometimes it starts with love, with a pen placed gently in your hand by someone you die for. I still remember the day Marissa and Adam came to me, years ago, their eyes filled with hope and desperation. The bank had rejected their mortgage. Their credit was too thin, their savings too small. I was the steady one, the woman who had spent decades waking before dawn, grading papers, saving every extra dollar, building a life brick by brick. "Mom, it's just a formality," Marissa said, her hand resting over mine. "We'll handle everything. We just need your signature to get started." I wanted to believe her. So I signed. I co-signed the loan, paid the down payment when they fell short, and even covered the property tax when Adam lost his job 2 years later. Each time I told myself it was temporary, that love meant stepping in where life fell short. But temporary has a way of stretching until it becomes permanent. They called it their home, posted smiling photos of the living room I'd paid for, the kitchen I'd chosen tiles for. I watched from the sidelines, invisible but essential, like scaffolding no one thanks once the building stands tall. When the last mortgage check cleared, from my account, not theirs, Marissa sent a text. "Thanks, Mom. You've always been our safety net. Not partner, not owner, just net." That night, I sat at my desk, the final receipt still warm in my hands. On paper, I was half the owner of their dream.
In reality, I was a ghost, haunting a home I helped create but wasn't welcome to enter. It was the first signature I ever regretted, and the last one I'd let them have.
Christmas 3 years ago should have been warm, the kind of day wrapped in laughter and the smell of cloves, where memories feel like a gift instead of a wound. I'd arrived early, wearing the red scarf Ruby had given me, a tin of sugar cookies still warm in my hands. I remember standing at the doorway, listening to the sound of my daughter's voice, bright, melodic, carrying through the house I helped them buy. For a moment, I believed things were finally right again. The dining room sparkled, candles flickering against silver, garland draped across the mantel, and laughter weaving through the air like music. My heart softened. I looked for my seat, the one I'd always shared beside Marissa, close enough to feel included in her world. But my chair was gone. "Mom, you can sit here," she said, motioning toward the far end of the table, near the kitchen door, where the draft slipped in with every passing plate. Sitting there, I could smell the food, but not the conversation. The new seat beside Marissa belonged to Catherine, Adam's mother. Her voice confident and honey-sweet as she poured the wine. "It's cozier this way," she smiled, not looking at me. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because crying would have given them proof that I was too emotional, the phrase they used when guilt felt inconvenient. All through dinner, I listened to stories about cruises, renovations, and plans I wasn't part of. I nodded, smiled, and pretended the lump in my throat was just from the turkey. That night, driving home under quiet Christmas lights, I realized something heavy. You don't have to be disowned to be erased. Sometimes all it takes is one missing chair and a family too busy to notice you're standing. It was spring when the second fracture appeared. Soft sunlight, azaleas blooming across Savannah, and a silence that hummed louder than words. I was cleaning the porch when my phone buzzed. A photo. No caption, no message, just an image glowing against the screen. There she was, Marissa, glowing and radiant, her hands resting on her belly at what looked like a baby shower. Balloons in soft pinks, a banner that read, "Welcome Ruby." Laughter frozen in pixels, tables draped in linen, cupcakes lined like pearls. But no trace of me. I stared at the image for a long time, waiting for a second photo to come. Maybe one that included me, a picture of my chair waiting somewhere off frame. But nothing followed. Later, I scrolled through social media. There it was again. Same smiles, same guests, and in one corner, Catherine, beaming like a queen, her hand placed over Marissa's shoulder as if to say, "This is our moment." No mention of me. Not even a thank you for the nursery set I'd ordered a month earlier, the one that had quietly arrived on their doorstep with my name on the shipping label. That night, I framed the photo anyway. I told myself love means celebrating from afar, even when you aren't invited inside. I placed it on my mantle and whispered, "It's fine. They're young. They forgot." But as weeks passed, I realized it wasn't forgetfulness, it was comfort. They'd grown comfortable without me. And that realization sank deeper than any insult could. Because when you stop being invited to the moments that define your family, you start to understand they don't just forget your presence, they unlearn your importance. The morning after the cruise left port, the house felt heavier than usual. I tried to fill it with noise. The radio, the kettle, the old clock ticking too loudly. But silence has a way of finding its cracks. I told myself they were probably boarding, smiling, waving from the deck. I even imagined little Ruby pressing her face against the rail, calling out, "Grandma, look at the ocean!" That image used to comfort me, but that morning, it hurt. By afternoon, I'd made peace with it. Or so I thought. Then my phone buzzed. A text alert from my credit card company. New charge, $648, Serenity Deck Spa renewal. I blinked at it, convinced it was a mistake. Serenity Deck. I knew that name. It was the spa on the ship, the same one I had helped book. Months ago, when we planned the trip together, I had offered to put the reservations on my card. "It'll be easier," I'd said. And Marissa, smiling that practice smile, had promised, "We'll handle the rest, Mom. I'll pay you back before we sail." They sailed. I stayed. And the card was still connected. I stared at the charge until the numbers blurred. It wasn't just a transaction. It was proof. Proof that I had been erased emotionally, yet still useful financially. I called the credit card company, voice steady, hands trembling only once. "That charge wasn't authorized," I said. The woman on the other end asked if I had lost my card. "Yes," I replied softly. "I've lost it, and everything tied to it." When I hung up, I didn't cry. I just sat there, the hum of the fridge the only sound, realizing that sometimes betrayal doesn't break you, it empties you, until all that's left is clarity.
2 days after canceling the card, I found myself walking up the narrow staircase of an old building on Bay Street, the kind where time lingers in the wood. The brass plate on the door read, "Graham Porter, attorney at law." The same man who'd once handled my husband's estate after the funeral. Back then I'd been soft-spoken, still learning how to live without half of myself. Now I climbed those stairs not to mourn, but to reclaim. Graham looked up from behind his desk, his white hair perfectly combed, the faintest surprise in his eyes. "Eleanor," he said, rising to shake my hand. "You don't call unless it matters." "It matters," I said simply, and placed the leather folder on his desk. It landed with the sound of a truth I'd ignored too long. He flipped through the papers, mortgage statements, tax records, canceled checks, each one a small confession of how much I had sacrificed. The room was quiet except for the steady tick of a wall clock. When he finally looked up, his expression was calm but sharp. "Your name," he said, tapping the deed with his pen, "is still on the title. No transfer, no release, no quitclaim. By law, you are a co-owner. In practice," he paused, meeting my eyes, "you could sell it without their consent." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. It wasn't victory I felt. It was something heavier, older, like truth pressing into bone. I had spent years being grateful for crumbs, convinced that love required erasure. But now the law said what my heart had always whispered. They didn't give me anything. I built it. I paid for it. It was mine. When I left his office, the Savannah sun felt different, brighter, but with edges sharp enough to cut through illusion.
That evening, I went home with the kind of silence that hums like a warning. I brewed tea I wouldn't drink and sat staring at the leather folder on my desk, the same one Graham had read through that morning. My mind was steady, but my heart felt like a door I'd left unlocked for too long. I started sorting through drawers, telling myself it was just preparation, a little organizing before I decided what to do next. Receipts, birthday cards, old postcards from Ruby when she was just learning to write her name. I smiled at those shaky letters before setting them aside. Then, beneath a stack of unused envelopes, I found it, a thin blue folder that wasn't mine.
Curiosity became dread as I opened it. Inside were neatly printed emails, clipped together in order. Descender, Marissa Holt. The recipient, Catherine Holt. I read the first few lines, and my stomach turned cold. If we can show consistent bills and utilities in our names, we can push for a transfer. The county sees long-term residence as ownership. Catherine. And Marissa's reply, smaller, softer, but sharper than glass. We just need to hold on. Eventually, it'll all be ours. I read those words again and again until they stopped being letters and became a blade. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd planned around me. I should have felt rage, but instead, what came was stillness, that terrifying calm that follows a long storm, the kind where you finally see what's left standing. I closed the blue folder and slid it between the deed and the receipts. The evidence was clean, undeniable. They were still at sea, but the tide had already turned, and this time I wasn't waiting on the shore. I was preparing to let it all go.
When I called Graham the next morning, my voice didn't tremble. "I'm ready," I told him. "Find someone discreet." He didn't ask questions. He knew the tone of a woman who had finally decided to stop bleeding quietly. By noon, he'd introduced me to Margaret Hayes, a realtor known for her quiet efficiency and firm grace. She arrived at my door 2 days later, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and no trace of pity. "We'll keep it private," she promised, her voice low and sure. "No sign, no gossip, just a clean, quiet sale." Within a week, she found a buyer, a young couple from Atlanta, newly married, polite enough to take their shoes off at the door. They walked through each room reverently, admiring the beams, the old fireplace, the garden I'd once planted with Ruby. "It feels loved," the woman said softly. Loved. The word caught in my throat. They made a cash offer that same afternoon. No delays, no conditions. Just finality wrapped in ink and signatures. On the morning of the closing, I sat at my dining table, the same one that had once been pushed to the corner during Marissa's dinner parties, and signed my name for the last time. The pen didn't shake. When the funds transferred, I didn't feel guilt. I felt gravity, like the earth had finally shifted to stand beneath my own feet again. That evening, I changed every lock, polished the doorknobs, and taped a letter to the front door. It read, "Property sold. All communication through counsel." No anger, no apology, just truth. Printed clean, centered, final. When I turned the key one last time, I didn't just lock the house. I sealed away the version of me that waited by that door and walked into the quiet freedom I had always deserved.
The ship docked 2 days later. I wasn't there to see it. I was already miles away in a small seaside cottage that smelled of salt and jasmine. But I could picture it perfectly. Marissa, Adam, and Catherine dragging their suitcases up the familiar brick path, Ruby bouncing beside them, all laughter and travel dust. They'd expect the porch light to be glowing, the one I always left on. But that night, it stayed dark. When the key refused to turn, they must have tried again, harder this time. Maybe Adam jiggled the handle, maybe Catherine muttered something about faulty locks. And then the moment of realization, the notice taped to the door, stark against the wood. Property sold, all communication through counsel. No shouting, no spectacle, just silence, heavier than any argument could be. Neighbors peeked to big curtains. Charleston loves a quiet scandal, and mine was clean, wordless, irreversible.
By the time they posted their rehearsed story online, all about betrayal and boundaries, I was sitting on the porch of my cousin's cottage, listening to the waves. Their words didn't touch me. The truth had already spoken in ink, in deeds, in signatures that couldn't be undone. Weeks later, in my new townhouse, I unpacked my life piece by piece. My mother's teapot, Ruby's old drawings, the books no one ever asked to borrow. Each item fit perfectly in its place. Smaller, but freer. Some nights, I still think of Marissa. Not with hate, but with distance. Because love without respect isn't love. It's labor. And I've retired from that job. Now when I sip my evening tea and the world is finally quiet, I don't wait for a call or an apology or a knock. The silence is my peace, and it finally belongs to me.